You did good. Did really, really good. Welcome. This is my first time here this year. It feels a bit weird. I feel like I'm halfway through January, but it's not. Is it? It is. It is halfway through January. Sorry, I missed you guys last week. I was away at another church last week. It's not because I was cheating on you. Maybe. So I went to another church in Shepparton, an Encounter Church, and I had fun there. We had fun there, didn't we, Sage? And the kids enjoyed it. But I don't think there's anything like Epicentre. Like the worship wasn't the same, the people weren't the same. I did have a thought though while I was there. I'm like, gee, this church is good. Why can't our church be like that church? And then I realized that's because you don't see the inner workings of this church. Like, isn't that the case? Like you go, like the grass is always greener on the other side. And I love you guys. I love this church. I love what I think that God has in store for us this year in 2024. How weird's that? Anyways, I'm rambling on, and if I don't stop, I'll continue rambling on for God knows how long. And you guys know you don't want that because you experienced me before. So Jesus has this really direct statement that he makes to a crowd of people, depending on which gospel that you read it from, to a crowd of people or directly just to his disciples, where he says this. He says, if any of you wants to be my followers, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily and follow me. Now, if there is anything that should turn you off Christianity or following Jesus, it should be this statement. And especially if you don't know why, I'm about to unpack that, but especially for first century Christians, first century people living in first century Palestine, because this meant something specific. The cross wasn't just like, oh, that's a nice necklace, or it was something like fashionable to wear. The cross literally meant one thing and one thing only. It meant death. As far as this was a Roman crucifixion device or Roman execution device, torture device that always ended in death. And so for first century Jews, first century people, this meant one thing and one thing alone. In fact, one of the historians from Jesus' time wrote that at one particular day that the Roman soldiers crucified some 2,000 Jews. Like this meant one thing. And so if there's anything that would depict like, I'm not interested in this is nuts, this is stupid, or would highlight like cult leader, like if I said this, you would put me in the category of cult leader because that's what you do, and I'd expect that you do that. But Jesus, he says this, and he says this for a reason, and he continues on because the statement doesn't just start here and finish there. He continues on with the statement as far as if any of you want to be my followers, you need to give up your own way, take up your cross daily and follow me. And he says, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And so what he's trying to highlight to them is he's trying to say, hey, you know what? I have come to show you a different way. I've come to show you a different way of living. I have come to show you a different way of connecting with God. I have come to show you a different lifestyle to live. In John 10:10, Jesus makes a comment. He says that I have come that they might have life and they might have life more abundantly, or life to the full, or depending on whatever translation that you read it in. And so what Jesus is trying to unpack and trying to highlight as far as if you want to save your life, not take up your cross, not march to death, not necessarily always having to mean literal death, like that same statement, take up your cross daily and follow me. There's the literal aspect of it, like especially for them. But then there's also the figurative aspect of it. Like, I'm going to take up my cross and die to my own desires, die to my own way of behaving, my own lifestyle choices, die to that, and I'm going to live for him. And so what he's saying is like, ultimately, if you choose to follow one way of living, your way of living, you're going to end up losing everything. You're not gonna find a life that's fulfilling. You're not going to find a life that's connecting with God. You're not going to find that. But if you choose to give up your desires, your way of living, this is what will happen in turn. You will discover life. You will discover life. And one of the things that he's talking about here is he's talking about the difference between Christians and Christians. Like there's a difference between Christians and Christians. As far as there's two camps or categories of Christians. There's one camp or category of Christians that claim to follow Jesus, or they say that I love Jesus, I follow Jesus, but their lifestyle looks nothing like following Jesus. There's a statement of belief of, I am following Jesus, I love Jesus, I've accepted Jesus, but not one part of my lifestyle looks like that of someone that is a Jesus follower. And then you've got this other group of Christians that is like the opposite of that, and they get things wrong. Like, I'm not trying to say that this other group are perfect. But this other group of Christians, they claim to follow Jesus, and their lifestyle and actions depict someone that is following Jesus. And chiefly, it's because of these two camps. And I get that everyone makes mistakes. So regardless of what camp you're in, like every one of us makes mistakes. You aren't perfect. Even if you are striving to outwork your faith in Jesus, like you're not perfect and you make mistakes. I'm not talking about the mistakes that we make. I'm talking about the deliberate choices of, I'm going to choose to live this way because this is just more convenient or more comfortable, versus I'm going to choose to live this way and it's uncomfortable and it's perhaps inconvenient in this moment, but I'm going to choose to live this way because this is how Jesus asked me to live. It's because of these two camps that the world, the people outside of the church, end up pointing the finger at people in the church and calling us hypocrites. Because what they see and what they witness is people claiming to live one way or claiming to follow this way of life, this way of living, and then living completely a different way. And so they look at people doing that and they point their fingers and say, hang on, I thought that you were a Christian. And now I get it because if you've been on the receiving end of that, and we've probably all been on the receiving end of that, sometimes rightly so, perhaps other times not rightly so at all. And I get that sometimes that stuff comes from a misunderstanding of Scripture, a misunderstanding of context of the Bible, as far as some of you might have tattoos and you're like, someone come up to me, you've got tattoos. Like that means that you claim to be a Christian, but you're obviously not a Christian because you've got tattoos, or you're a guy and you've got long hair, and there's these different things that people judge us on. But generally, and this is a general statement, generally, no one outside the church generally judges those inside the church on the little things like that. They judge them on the big things. That, hey, you claim to be a Christian, but you're constantly telling white lies. You claim to be a Christian, but you're choosing this lifestyle. You're choosing to steal. You're choosing to cheat. Like, I thought you were meant to be a person of integrity, but you're choosing to deliberately live this other lifestyle. And they end up judging and pointing their finger. And a lot of the time I'd say it's rightly so, because we end up doing this. We end up choosing compromise over integrity. We end up choosing a lifestyle of compromise. I'm going to compromise the direction that I'm wanting to go, that I think that I should go, that Jesus is wanting me to go. I'm going to compromise that because I want to have my desires or my desires fulfilled, ultimately. We're in week 2 of a sermon series called On the Right Foot, where we're looking at, ultimately, how do I get on the right foot when it comes to following Jesus? And you could look at it as far as we're starting a new year. How do I get on the right foot this year? Like, what does it look like in different areas and aspects of my life to get on the right foot? And so what we're doing over these next, I think it's like 5 weeks, 4 weeks now, is we're going through Joseph's story. You can read about Joseph. Chris started it from Genesis 37. He started it last week. And we're tracking through Joseph's story of the different things that he interacts with and the decisions and the choices that he makes to get on the right foot. So some of the things that we're looking at is like, how do I deal with my dreams, my desires, my visions? And Chris touched on this last week. How do I deal with hurt? How do I deal with like sucky times and sucky seasons? And Shaz is going to talk about that next week. It's going to be fantastic. How do I deal with success? How do I deal with hurt or unforgiveness? And this week, what we want to talk about, what we want to look at is, how do I deal with temptation? Something that every single one of us struggle with, wrestle with, turn up in our lives is temptation. How do I deal with temptation when Perhaps not when it's, how do I deal with temptation when it is that it turns up? And so the thought is, like, how do I deal with temptation? And Jesus' brother James would put it this way. He says, temptation comes from your own desires. He says, temptation comes from your own desires, and what it does is it entices us and drags us away. And if we follow it, it leads to death and destruction. And so what desires are and temptation is, it's not evil, it's not wicked. Perhaps some of them are in that category. It's not any of that, but what you'll find as we track through this is when it comes to desires, there's right place, right time, and all of that comes into it. So the question is, like, how do I deal with desires? And the thought that I want you to pick up with, how do I deal with desires? Like, what does it look like to deal with desires? It looks like this, that we deliberately do this. We choose integrity over compromise. How do I deal with temptations when they turn up? I choose integrity over compromise. How do I deal with this desire that I have that is pulling me this way? We choose integrity over compromise. In other words, what I'm saying is this, that we choose to live a way that highlights, especially if you're a Jesus follower, that says that I am following someone other than myself. So the story of Joseph, we're going to pick it up in Genesis 39. Chris started the story last week. Joseph's story starts in Genesis 37, where he has this coat that his father gives him. He has these dreams, these wacky dreams, and everyone gets upset at him. And it ends up with him being, basically his brothers conspire. You went through the whole thing, didn't you? I obviously didn't listen through the whole of your message. I promise I listened to a lot of it. Because Chris didn't unpack it properly for you. Yeah. Chris's message last week was fantastic. I did go through it. But so Genesis 37 starts with Joseph, like his father giving him a coat, and he has these weird and wacky dreams, and he's like, hey guys, brothers, dad, mum, hey, these are the dreams, and they're like, no, surely that's not going to happen. And anyways, his brothers get that angry and irate with him. They come up with this idea, this is what we're going to do. We are going to get rid of this problem that is in our lives. We're going to get rid of it for good. We're sick of him. Don't like him. Don't need him in our lives. This is what we'll do. We're going to sell him. Isn't that a great... If you're a sibling, like imagine... No, let's not even go there. Let's not think about it. We're going to sell him. And so what they do is that they come up with this incredibly crafty plan, and they grab him, they rip his coat off him that his dad gave them, and they throw him in a pit, they get blood, put blood all over the coat, and then there's some traders come along, and they say, hey, this guy down here, he's well built, he'll be a good worker, take him, how much will you give us? And they make a profit off him. So they sell him, take the coat back to dad, and they say to dad, and this is important for later on in the story, take the coat back to dad and say, a wild animal has ripped him apart and he is dead. Your son that you loved is gone. And so they sell him to some traders. Stop laughing at me, Chris. Stop laughing. They sell him to some traders that in turn end up selling him to this guy called Potiphar. We're about to pick up in Genesis 39. And so what Potiphar is, he's like second in charge to Pharaoh. He is a big, big deal. He's not Pharaoh, but he's second in charge to Pharaoh. Like he is a big deal. And so they sell him over to Potiphar, and he ends up being a servant in Potiphar's house. And it says this from Genesis 39 verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served. Everyone say that, served. Everyone say it again. Served. Everyone say it with some robust. Served. Thank you, fantastic. This, I'll get back to in a minute. So Joseph succeeded in everything that he did as he served the home of his Egyptian master, Potiphar. Potiphar did this. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything that he owned. And then from the day that Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake, to the point that all his household affairs ran smoothly and his crops and his livestock flourished, because this guy, Joseph, he knew how to manage things and to handle things. And it says that Potiphar gave Joseph complete administration administrative responsibility over everything that he owned, to the point that with Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. He didn't have to worry about anything except what food to eat. I find it so intriguing that this guy is a slave and he's bought to go into slavery, but he ends up leading nearly everything apart from what food to give him. Absolutely everything. And what I find so fascinating is that Joseph served in such a way that Potiphar saw something in him that was worthy of elevating, that was worthy of building. Joseph built integrity with this guy. And my suggestion is this, that Joseph didn't build integrity because he was just like, I'm just going to serve him really well. But he had a realization of who it was that he was serving. Joseph did. And Joseph realized this, that I am a slave today, and I am serving a slave master, but I don't serve the slave master, I serve God. And so Joseph had this realization of, I am going to serve him as though I am serving God. And because he made this distinction and this realization that while I'm here, in no matter what crappy situation that I'm in, I'm going to choose to serve God, it caused him to choose to serve and live with integrity. Rather than just turning up, doing his job, exactly what he had to do to get by, he decided this, I am going to serve, no matter what it is that I'm doing, I'm going to serve like I'm serving the King of Kings, because that is who I am serving. And what it did was, it built integrity. You see, the thing with integrity, it is easy to build integrity with the people that actually like you. Like your friends and family, if they like you, it's pretty easy to build and keep integrity with them because they like you. They forgive you. They get over things with you. They respect you. And even when you upset them or do things that would cause anyone else to not respect you or like you, they get over it. And I'd like to think at least they forgive you. But it's a whole lot harder to build integrity with someone that doesn't care about you, that you're just there to fill a role, to fill a responsibility. You're just there to serve. You're just there to do that. Like anyone can build integrity with people that like them, but it's a whole lot harder to build integrity with people outside of your world that couldn't care less about you. Joseph's a slave. But yet this slave building such integrity with Potiphar, that Potiphar saw him worthy of being exalted into this position where he could serve and have all this incredible authority. The truth is this, that for all of us, you, me, all of us, we're constantly either building or destroying integrity. And the integrity that we live with or build or all of that will be determined in large part, especially if you're a Christian, will be determined by the master that we determine who it is that we are serving. Are we going to serve my own desires, my own wants, my own feelings and follow them regardless of what I should or perhaps shouldn't do? Or are we going to be deliberate as far as make this decision before the temptation arises that I am going to serve God? And ultimately that question, especially if you're Christian, because all of us that are Christians, we have someone in our lives, some people in our lives that are watching us, that are following us, that aren't yet on the journey of following Jesus. But they're interested. And perhaps the thought that is going through their head is that the person that when everything falls apart that I can go to, that I feel will have an answer for me? They're watching us and they're watching the integrity that we live with. They're wanting to see this. Are you actively outworking what it is that you claim that you believe? We're all either building or downgrading our integrity. And the thing that I find so fascinating when it comes to temptation, I'm going to generalize it because I know if I say all the time, someone's going to come up to me afterwards and find a spot where it doesn't fit in this category. But I'd say, for the most part, temptation turns up and it does this. It turns up and confronts us where our integrity has the opportunity to be hemorrhaged. Temptation turns up and confronts us in this place that will confront our integrity and cause it to, if we outwork that, then our integrity is going to be hemorrhaged. And this is the very thing that happens to Joseph. And so he's in Potiphar's house. He's given responsibility over everything, authority over everything, to the point that the only thing he doesn't have authority over is what it is that Potiphar eats. And then this happens. Joseph was very handsome and a well-built young man, just like myself. And everyone else thought he was funny, but not me. So that's the difference between him and me. Anyways, Joseph was a very handsome, that was a joke. If you're new, I'm so sorry. I have really bad jokes, really bad. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. And she says this, she says, I want you to do this. Come and sleep with me. Come and sleep with me. I want you to come and sleep with me and engage with me. I want you to do... There's kids in the room. I probably don't need to go any further than that. You know what I'm talking about. So this temptation is it's the one that turns up and confronts him, and as far as causes him to confront this idea or have this question like, am I going to uphold the integrity that God is building in me, or am I going to compromise that and follow my desires and do whatever it is that I want and end up hemorrhaging my integrity? And the thing that I think Joseph is confronted with here is the very thing that we're all confronted with. Like, integrity turns up and it administers, or at least draws to something that's going on in our heart. As far as temptation is always talking to a desire that is in our heart. And so for Joseph, what I find so incredibly interesting is that he's given responsibility and authority over everything, but he's not tempted to take some livestock and throw a big party and kill it and throw a big party and have this feast. He's not tempted to just push everyone else's responsibility, or as far as push his responsibility onto everyone else, and he just sit back and enjoy life. He's not tempted with that. He's tempted with this. He's tempted to sleep with Potiphar's wife. And I think that he's tempted to sleep with Potiphar's wife because while the other things would have been a temptation, this was the desire that was on his heart. The desire that was on his heart, I'd suggest, is not necessarily Potiphar's wife, but the desire that was on his heart was companionship and intimacy. Temptation always turns up and it calls at a desire that's on your heart. Just because a desire doesn't make it evil. Just because it's a desire desires aren't evil. They aren't wicked. They aren't anything like that. But there's right place, right time, because the reality is this: just because a desire is healthy doesn't make it helpful. Just because a desire is something that is healthy in particular context doesn't make it helpful. If Joseph was married, or if Joseph was married, this would be healthy and this would be helpful. But how many of you realize that this was a healthy desire, companionship and intimacy, but this wouldn't be very helpful if he was to act on it? This would probably get his head cut off. Not helpful for living. You with me? Just because something's healthy doesn't make it helpful. But the flip side of it is, just because a desire is helpful doesn't make it healthy. Just because something is healthy doesn't mean it's helpful, but it flips as well. Because it's helpful doesn't mean it's healthy. Just because it's helpful for you to spin the yarn like that gets you the promotion doesn't mean it's helpful at all. Just because you could treat someone that way in your business, or you could do this or you could do that, just because it would be helpful to get you to move forward or promote you or whatever it is, doesn't mean it's healthy. It doesn't make it healthy. Just because something is healthy doesn't make it helpful. Just because a desire is helpful doesn't make it healthy. In fact, in order to make it helpful and healthy, especially if you're a Christian, it looks like this. Desire needs to first be holy, or desire needs to first be outworked in a holy manner before it can be healthy and helpful. Meaning this, that desires that are healthy and helpful have gone through this filtering process, that have chosen, before they turn up, who is it that I am serving? My desires or God? All of us struggle with this. chiefly probably me. All of us struggle with it in different levels, in different ways, and in different things, but all of us struggle with this. So here's some questions. Does this, because I realize this, that when it comes to desires and temptation, all of us have got stuff going on in our life currently. All of us have got stuff going on in our life that you perhaps know that you shouldn't be doing, that it's not helpful and it's not healthy. Or maybe it is helpful, but not in this context. Maybe it is healthy, but not in this context. And all of us have got stuff going on in our lives, I don't know what it is right now, that aren't necessarily worth doing or good to do. And perhaps some of you, you've got stuff that you didn't know you perhaps shouldn't be doing, but right now something is like, I'm not sure if I should keep on doing that. And so with those things in mind, here's some questions. Does this desire, this temptation, does it draw me closer to my spouse, my family, my children? Does it draw me closer? Or if they were to find out about it, would it distance them away? Or does it do this? Does it line up with Jesus' teachings? Does this desire line up with Jesus' teachings, or does it not line up at all? And then the last one is, does this glorify Jesus? Because if it doesn't do that, then it probably doesn't fall in the category of something that is going to be holy. And probably what it's going to do is fall into the category of something that is going to hemorrhage your integrity with the people around you. It's probably what it's going to do. And so the thought with this is, desires that aren't holy or aren't helpful or aren't healthy, especially within their context, they end up doing this. They just make things complicated. Desires that aren't holy end up making things complicated. Like, when has casual sex made things less complicated? They make things more complicated. Or dating and sex. Dating and sex don't make things less complicated. They make it more complicated as you're trying to now work out, how do I get to know this person while I'm now dealing with, ultimately, I've awoken lust, and that is running rampant, not me trying to connect with them and get to know them. Using someone as a stepping stone to get a promotion only makes things more complicated. Disingenuous living only makes things more complicated. When we choose to compromise our integrity, it only ever makes things more complicated. And so for Joseph, she comes to him and she's like, I want you to sleep with me. But because he's already made this decision of, I am going to follow God rather than my desires, he's able to do this. Turn around and he's like, you know what? My master, Potiphar, he trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except for you, because you are his wife. Nothing else is off the table, but you are, because you're his wife. And so how could I, he says, how could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin, he says, against God. And right here, he drops a tidbit of who it is that he's serving. He doesn't say it would be a great sin against my master. It would be a great sin against the God that I am serving, against God. Highlighting that, you know what, I'm not here to serve Potiphar. I'm serving Potiphar, but I'm here to serve God. This would be a great sin against God. And the story continues on. But she kept doing this, putting pressure on Joseph day after day. But he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. Then one day, when no one else was around, and he went in to do his own work, how many know this is when temptation turns up? When no one else is around. And why is that a good time for temptation to turn up? Because when no one else is around, no one else is going to find out about it. You can do whatever you want when no one else is around. They're never going to know. It's a little secret between you and God, and if there's another person involved, that person. But you can do whatever you want when no one else is around, or seemingly because you think that no one else is going to find out. And so one day when no one else is around, he went to do his work, and she came and she grabbed him by his cloak, demanding this, come and sleep with me. When no one else is around, this is the temptation. The question that I'd ask you is, when no one else is around, what is the temptation that is knocking on your heart? What is the temptation that you are currently struggling with? What is the temptation that perhaps is causing you to feel separated from God? What is the temptation that is causing you to be separated from your spouse, from your family? What is causing you, or what is a temptation that is causing you to divert off the path that God has in store for you? It's not about judgment and saying that you're a wicked person or anything like that, but sometimes it is literally this, coming to the realization of what I am doing isn't healthy and it's not helpful. And so Joseph realizes that this isn't going to be good. And so he doesn't just push back and say no. He doesn't just do what he's been trying to do and say, hey, no, Mrs. Potiphar, this isn't good. I don't want to do this. He doesn't just like move to the next room. He realizes that this, if he doesn't do something, is going to end up somewhere where he doesn't want it to end up. And so he doesn't just push back, he runs. And it says this, Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. He doesn't just pull away a little bit, he tears himself away because she's grabbed hold of him. And so he tears himself away from her and he runs out the doorway or jumps out the window. I don't know, you can make up your own movie in your head as to how that happens, but he takes off as fast as he can to get out of there, because the reality is that just pushing back and saying no a whole lot of the time isn't enough. A whole lot of the time it's not enough, because one could say there's temptations and there's temptations, just like there's Christians and there's Christians. There's temptations just, that'd be intriguing, but no, I'm not going to do that because I'm not foolish enough. But then there's other ones that call to a desire that's in our heart, and it might be something that's healthy but not helpful in the current moment, in the current time. It might be something that is helpful but not healthy due to what it would do to other people. And sometimes, in fact, I'd suggest a lot of the time with the ones that are really drawing on our hearts, it's not enough just to push back and say, no, I'm not interested, that we need to take it a step further and do something harsh and run. Joseph runs. Jesus puts it in another category. In fact, he's a little bit more upfront and direct with it. And he's like, you just need to cut it off. Just cut it off. Get rid of it. But he puts it in this category. If your right eye, he says, causes you to sin, what do? You gouge it out. If your right hand causes you sin, you cut it off. And so what Jesus said, and this is literal language, and he's talking figuratively. Okay, so he's not saying, you need to start poking your eye out and cutting your hand off. Oh gosh, I did something I shouldn't do. I need to cut that off. I thought of something I shouldn't do, so then I should operate on my head and remove my brain. It's ridiculous and ludicrous. What he's saying is that you need, if there's something in your life that shouldn't be in your life that is causing you to sin, causing you to mess up, you need to take deliberate actions and cut it out of your life. In Joseph's case, it was, I am going to run. I'm going to get out of here as fast and as quickly as I can. And so I don't know what it is for you, but the question that I'd pose to you is, what sin have you got in your life? What is it that you've got in your life that is tempting you or enticing you and dragging you away? What sin or what temptation is in your life that is tempting you to sin? What temptation have you got in your life currently that is tempting you, enticing you, dragging you to sin? I don't know what it is, but some ideas, some thoughts, and it could be as simple as this. You might have to do this. To cut it off, you might have to delete or unfriend someone. There might be someone on your Facebook account, social media account, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever you want to run with. It might be someone on your phone that you need to delete and unfriend. Maybe not because necessarily anything's overly happening at the moment, but if your spouse found it, it would say a whole lot. And it's not helpful or healthy when it comes to your relationship with your spouse. Maybe it's someone that's just constantly gravitating a connection to you. And what's coming out of it is slowly but surely an emotional affair. Or it's building and bringing up something that shouldn't be awoken yet. Maybe it looks like this, that you need to delete them. This is the cutting off. This is the running away. Maybe for you, it's that you're just really bad with your money. And you can't save a dime because anytime you see something that you like, you've got to spend it. And God's got a future for you. God's got plans in store for you, but you're never going to be able to get there and outwork it because you just can't be a wise steward of your money. And newsflash, when it comes to Christians and money, God's got big plans for your money. Not for you just to give it to the church at all. God's got plans for you to steward your money wisely so that you can have a decent life, a good life, so that you have savings for when something goes wrong, for when life goes belly up. So you've got retirement plans. God wants you to steward your money well, but perhaps the temptation for you is this, that you just want to spend it all the time because every time you see something shiny, like, I must have it right now. And maybe the cutting off is that you set up a secure account that you can't touch. And if you haven't got the nous to set it up, ask your mum. They'll probably do it for you. Sometimes we need to make deliberate things in order to set ourselves up for the life that God has in store for us. Or maybe it's this, that your phone is doing this. It is stealing family time. You're constantly pulling your phone out at the table. Look at that video. And you're addicted to the dog videos. You know, the dogs that make the stupid faces. Me, I don't know what it is, but there's these guys on Facebook and they're always playing with cobras. I'm addicted to them. I'm addicted to them. There's this weird thing with me and snakes that I'm just so fascinated by it, and I could spend hours watching this guy play with cobras. They eventually get bitten and it's horrendous. But it intrigues me how long it goes on before anything happens. And anyways, and so maybe for you, it's your phone is stealing from family time. Maybe your phone's not just stealing from family time, but stealing from your connection with God. So maybe you need to set something on your phone that actually locks you out at a certain time so that you have family time and you have connection with God. Maybe you're dating and you need to curate some dating boundaries of I like them, and that's, if you like them and you're dating them, that's a good thing. But I can't keep my hands off them. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some dating boundaries. We're not going to be alone together. That's a no-no. It's not going to end well. It's going to end in something that Joseph was running away from as well. It's not going. So we're going to curate some dating boundaries. Or maybe it's this, that I've got a problem with pornography. And so we're not going to have the computer in the private room. We're going to have it in the main room, so there's no privacy. We're just going to remove any form, not necessarily any form of temptation, but we're going to put as many roadblocks as we can to cut it off. How do I deal with temptation? What's the right foot forward when it comes to dealing with temptation? It is cutting it off. It is making a deliberate effort of I am going to choose integrity over compromise. And the truth is this. Choosing integrity over compromise is never easy, but it is always the right foot forward. Even if it looks like you start taking steps backwards. Because for those of you that know Joseph's story would know that it doesn't go well for him here. Even though he chooses integrity over compromise, it doesn't go well for him here. In fact, it gets worse. Joseph ends up he runs, he flees, just like what we read in the story. Potiphar comes home. Potiphar's wife goes to him that this Egyptian slave that you brought into our home, this is what he did to me today. He tried to rape me. And here's the proof. I grabbed his cloak and I screamed and he ran, and I've still got the cloak to prove it. He came in here trying to do this. You brought him in here. Look at everything that you've done. So Potiphar gets irate, just like any husband would. And Potiphar does this. He took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. Things end up going downhill for Joseph. He chooses this action of integrity and not compromising what it was or who it was that he was serving, and things start going belly up for him. But what I find so interesting, what I find so fascinating is when it comes to God, that God uses everything that the enemy wants to use to harm us, and he uses it to bring about good. Romans 8:28 says that God works all things together for good for those that love God. And that's like a key thing for those that love God. God works all things together for good for those that love God. Jesus' comment to his disciples was, if you love me, you will what? For those of you who know it, if you love me, you will. Good, Emmy. If you love me, he says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. What does that mean? If you love me, you will follow me. What does follow me look like? It means that you will follow me, you will pick up your cross daily, and you will drag it. Even if that looks like you go to a figurative death, you are going to choose who it is that you worship, and you're going to follow me. And so then it gets to Joseph, and he gets to his struggle, and what it is that he starts going through, and he chooses this, that I am going to pick up my cross long before Jesus even makes that statement. I'm going to pick up my cross, and I'm going to follow him. I'm going to follow God. I'm going to go this direction no matter what happens. This is the belief that if I follow him, if I love him, I will follow him, and he will make all things work together for good. And so this is what happens to Joseph, that he gets thrown into the king's prison. And this is so important as we move into next week and the week after, that Joseph gets thrown into the king's prison. Now, the clause that probably put here is, I don't at all believe that God set this up for Joseph to be thrown into prison, but this is what, as far as thrown into this prison, but this is what I believe, that God used all things to accomplish his purpose that he had in store for Joseph. And so he winds up in the king's prison, which ends up, as we move into next week and specifically the week after, that gives him an opportunity to have an audience with the king. And God uses this position that he finds himself in to outwork all things together for good, because Joseph chooses to do this, that I will not compromise my integrity. In fact, it goes on and says this, before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. And the warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. Joseph chooses this. When I got thrown into the pit, I served God. When I wound up in Potiphar's house, I served God. When I got thrown back into prison, I served God. And because he made this choice of I am going to serve God, God was able to consistently build his integrity with the people around him. Choosing integrity over compromise is never easy, but it's always the right foot forward that sets you up for whatever it is that God has in store for you. But that's the story for Shaz as she's going to continue next week. This story of on the right foot. How about you stand? Let me pray for you. Father, I realize that none of us get it right, God. Not one of us are perfect. Not one of us are sinless. That we're all struggling and wrestling with sin and wrestling with temptation. I want to say thank you that you are graceful, Father, with us. You are graceful with our struggles, Father. And that you want to meet us in the midst of those struggles and help us navigate them and work through them, Father. And so, God, I just want to pray that as I've been sharing and as I'm talking and as you continue to minister to people, that what doesn't happen, Father, is the enemy doesn't come in and breed condemnation of look how bad you are. But God, I want to pray that what we get to do is we get to do some soul searching, ask this question of who is it that I am following? Am I following you or am I following my own desires? And God, so as we go forward through into this week and this year, God, let us be people, let us be individuals, let us be a church, God, that make this deliberate effort of I'm going to choose to put the right foot forward and I'm going to make a decision today that says I am going to choose to worship you. And I'm going to choose to put integrity over compromise every day of the week. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, no need to hang around. Head out, grab a tea or coffee, connect with someone. Find someone that you don't know. Grab the number if they're willing to give it out and do this. Catch up with them this week. Look forward to seeing you guys next week.